Welcome, everyone. We're doing a new type of webinar with the Green Sports Alliance. We're going to be doing a moderated style innovation webinar focusing on social innovators and sustainable solutions for the sports industry. My name is Katie. For those of you who don't know me, I work in operations, member services, communication, and events for the Green Sports Alliance. So if you have any questions regarding GSA, you can email me. It's katie@greensportsalliance.org. And if you have questions throughout the webinar, you can submit them with the little questions button at the right hand corner of your screen. And we'll be sure to get to them at the end. The webinar is being recorded and it'll be sent to you after we're finished, so feel free to share it with your network. And if you stick around after the webinar, we'll have some opportunities to get involved with the Green Sports Alliance and some info on upcoming events. A big shout out to the Green Sports Alliance members, our sports screening movement leaders, and our Play to Zero partners, along with all of our members. Without your support, we would not be able to keep driving the mission of sustainable sports. If you're not part of the Alliance and you're looking to join us, you can email me, katie@greensportsalliance.org, or you can email the info email. It's info@greensportsalliance.org. So Green Sports Alliance member Ashoka helped put together our panel today. They are a robust global network of leading social entrepreneurs. They bring together individuals with new ideas to systematically address the world's biggest challenges with entrepreneurial skill to transform those ideas into national, regional, and global social impact. And to introduce our panelists, we have Nicole Rycroft, is an accomplished environmental activist, an Ashoka Fellow, former elite rower, and sociotherapist, and founder and executive director of Canopy. She works with over 900 of the world's biggest fashion and e-commerce and food and beverage brands to transform their supply chains and chain unsustainable practices. And we have Jürgen Griesbeck, is enthusiastic about system change and football, or American soccer, as a force for social good. He became the CEO and founder of Street Football World and launched Common Goal in 2017 to build an entrepreneurial ecosystem and mobilize the football industry to contribute efficiently to sustainably scale the impact. And we have Allison Tickell, established Julie's Bicycle in 2007 as a nonprofit dedicated to mobilizing action on the climate crisis across the entertainment and sports industry. Originally trained as a cellist, Allison's approach is rooted in her work with jazz improviser and teacher John Stevens, whose understanding of music and community activism created the foundational values that inspired Julie's Bicycle. And we have Elliot Arthur Warsop, is a sustainability and climate communications expert, founder and co-director of Football for the Future, a nonprofit that works with a variety of elite football stakeholders, from national leagues to associations, clubs, players, and brands, to engage with climate action in creative ways for internal and external stakeholders. And we have a special guest today, Eileen McManaman. She's the Green Sports Alliance board chair, who's going to be moderating this panel for us today. She's the founder of 5T Sports Group and was recognized in 2018 by the UN Global Compact for her leadership on the UN Sustainability Development Goals and co-authored the UNFCCC Sports for Climate Action Initiative. Thanks, Eileen, for joining us today, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you so much, Katie, and I'm so excited to be partnering today with the Ashoka Sport for Changemaking group, the sports advisory arm of leading social entrepreneurs who are tackling our world's biggest challenges, and with entrepreneurial skills to transform those ideas. So we want to jump right in because I think it's best to get to know all of our panelists through their work. And so we're gonna dive right in here with our first question so that we'll have plenty of time for all of your questions at the end. So we're here today to explore innovative approaches on how to identify, design, and implement sustainability solutions. We're very excited to learn from each of you. So our question to you is what is the challenge that you have identified through your organization that you'd like to tackle, and how are you solving it? So to start us off, I thought I might go to Jürgen, please, from Common Goal.
Hey everyone, real pleasure to be with you all. And maybe I have to go back a little on your question here, because when we started out with street football, well, the main reason why we started to use football as a tool to accelerate transformation in communities was actually to increase the reach, to make it attractive for young people to engage in processes, whatever that was in the field of health, in the field of education, in the field of environment, whatever. Football did always the same. It allowed people to access and stay long enough so that work on behavior change could happen. So that we did over maybe 20 years, and we're still working on that. That has become a global network of over 200 organizations that work in around about 100 countries, and the scope is more or less 2 million youth a day. Um, Now, as we grew into what the network would be at the end, we felt like now this is a whole new industry in itself, but it's actually not connected to what we understand as the soccer or the football industry. And there's so much football can offer from an industry perspective, especially if we look at, and here I come to the challenge that we have identified, which is a divided world, like the lack of cohesion. And there was actually no like enabling force inside that would be like act as a unifier or equalizer or however we want to call that. um, and we witness in parallel to that like the SDG struggling, actually because we're looking at this division, which translates into a lack of collaboration, which translates into a lack of leadership, like a servant leadership. And this is where we then said, okay, but what if we could activate a tool which we are already working with on a community level, that actually reaches everybody, that speaks to everybody, that speaks to everybody on a daily basis and several times, and not just in any way, but actually on a level of a shared passion, which is or happens to be soccer or football. So that was the reason why we then went off with the 1% idea, saying like, what if whatever stakeholder you are in the football industry, like in the commercialized football industry, what if you just contributed 1% of what you have? And we started out with athletes, and then went clubs and institutions and other stakeholders, brands in the industry. And Elliot can talk more about that, like on the specific climate action vertical. Um, so challenge that we identified is that we have a divided world. There's no unifying tool out there. There's no unifying institution actually out there. So we need something that does the job, and we identified football to be that tool.
Terrific. Thank you so much. I want to jump next to Nicole. Um,
Sure. Thanks, Eileen. And a slightly different channel than or challenge that we're grappling with. So I think we're all aware that humanity's grappling with two parallel ecological crises, the climate crisis and the precipitous decline in biodiversity. And much of that is being driven by unsustainable consumption. And so that is what Canopy works to change, to transform the supply chains that are currently driving deforestation and forest degradation. And we do that by really leaning in to help companies, large companies that, currently through the packaging that they're buying, the paper that they source, the wood-based textiles like rayon and viscose that they're integrating into their clothing, that they are, inadvertently contributing to deforestation, forest degradation, and through that significantly to pressures on our climate and biodiversity. And so we work with, as Katie mentioned, we work with more than 900 large corporate customers of the forest products industry, companies including Puma and Intersport, helping them to develop cutting edge environmental policies and then working with them to identify where they've got risk of sourcing from a high carbon or high biodiversity value forest ecosystem, and helping them develop a pathway towards lower carbon, more circular alternatives. And one of the things that we've seen the sports industry grappling with, as there's been an increased awareness and desire to shift away from plastics, is that many companies and many stadiums have inadvertently sort of traded in one environmental disaster for another. They've kind of hopped off plastics and are just buying more paper. So trading in, dead dolphins for dead orangutans, or kind of like, ocean pollution for deforestation. And I think for many of us, we're unaware that there's about 3.5 billion trees that are cut down every year to make paper-based packaging and wood-based textiles. That's about 2 soccer fields every second. And so this is an area where working together and leaning in to really send a clear signal back through the supply chain that it can't just be a choice of plastic or paper. There is a door number 3 that ultimately is more sustainable. And so it's really at that nexus of supply chain transformation and companies having more sustainable options to be able to source and then offer their clients and teams. That's where we focus.
Terrific. I'd like to take a bit of a sharper left turn over to Alison, because you've come to this work not like the other panelists necessarily through sports initially, but through music. So please tell us a little bit more about Julie's Bicycle.
Sure, I will. And thanks for those great contributions from Jürgen and Nicole. So Julie's Bicycle was set up actually by the music industry, which has so much in common with sports, including parts of its estate. And Julie's Bicycle set up in 2007, actually with a foundational bewilderment that I'm sure many of us share, which is that people were not at the heart of climate, of climate communications. There's still a huge disjunct. And furthermore, that actually the climate crisis is actually fundamentally a reflection of a cultural crisis of our values, what we care for, how we care for it, what matters to us. And so I suppose our conviction is that if we can deep dive and we can start to model a different way of expressing value and values within these very high profile, deeply loved places in which human beings gather together and have these extraordinary experiences of sport, of euphoria, of joy that we experience through arts, culture, sports, then that has to be a way of expressing this climate nature justice crisis differently and hopefully inspiring a different way of working through it. So that's our foundational belief. But of course, in order to make that work, really the communities, the cultural sports communities need to really understand this themselves. And there was at the time, some 17 years ago, a lot of bewilderment about how to really engage effectively in climate action within industries themselves. So that's where we started, and we've been on a wonderful journey since then, which is really about how to unpick that big challenge. What is an appropriate response to the climate challenge? Using our industries to embody different values of care, to scale that, to be really ambitious, and to map our work across to these critical frameworks. So I think that just a couple of thoughts on that. Sports culture, they're very similar, fragmented, they're audience facing, small and local, yet dominated by very large players, dominated by celebrity. This mixture of public and private finance, they're complex supply chains, but they are massively influential. And the big challenge that we all share is how to bring this together and focus on common purpose. This has already been brought in, bringing in those values of care. which means collaborating differently in a traditionally and very systematically competitive field. But the good news is that the frameworks are all there. The Paris Climate Agreement that we all need to work for. There's huge knowledge and simplicity now about what the challenge actually means. There's a lot of work done on biodiversity. The latest climate talks have been really interesting in bringing in climate justice in a new way. And now we need to map, and many of us are mapping ourselves across those fields. And I suppose the key things that we found that have really worked is in these very complex areas, finding out what we have in common, speaking to values that we share of love, care, working together on the big issues around reducing greenhouse gas emissions and decarbonisation, restoring nature and bringing people into the heart of this work, bringing together social and climate justice, and then generating together an infrastructure to support this with our joint commitments, targets, communications and ambitions. And Julie's Bicycles had wonderful examples of this working. So the good news is that I think there's a huge, really exciting shift. We need to be really good witnesses, really good celebrators, and really, really good collaborators who can speak to power in a different way.
Fantastic. Okay, Elliot, we come back to you. I thought it would be nice to start with football and kind of come back around to football as a bit of a football sandwich. So tell us about the challenge that you've chosen to take on and how you're addressing it specifically with Football for Future.
Sure. Well, my challenge now is to try and get my hands on a football sandwich. That sounds delicious. So, no, I mean, look, we set about 4 years ago was like the beginning of my climate and football journey. And as a football fan, I'm a Brighton fan. I've played football my whole entire life. My first experience as an activist was even like going on demonstrations to get planning permission to get my team, Brighton and Hove Albion, for us to get planning permission to get a new stadium built. That's where my journey in activism began. But as a football fan who cared about climate, there was nowhere for me to go. And I think that the main problems with the industry is twofold, really. One is that there was a lack of climate action. Nothing was happening in football. That's problematic. That's a challenge. The other thing is that there was a lack of conversation. There was a lack of normalization. The words climate or environmental sustainability and football, those would never be in the same sentence together. So that was the initial, and that's a very fundamental challenge if we're going to start, trying to work and catalyze climate action and sustainability in football and use it as a vehicle for change, like it's been used, and for so many other really important social purposes. This challenge needed to be identified, and we needed to try to work towards solving that. So, like I say, all movements, they need platforms, and brands of social movements, they provide platforms for other people who are interested, for people who are passionate. They provide a platform for community building where people can network and they can share learnings, and that platform can amplify a best practice. And that's kind of what Football for Future set out to be initially. We tried to be a platform where if you were someone who was a football fan, which is a lot of people, and you were somebody who cared about the planet, which is also a lot of people, you could come to us and we'd provide that community and start to try to normalize that conversation. I think in terms of how did we try to establish ourselves as an organization, or making ourselves visible strategically, we did this in 3 ways. I think authenticity, relatability, and credibility are three key pillars with which we try to do this. And this is the way that we frame ourselves. And framing theory is one of my favorite social movement theories. And this could be the language that we use, or it could be the way that it could be our visual aesthetic, or some of the vehicles that we use to deliver our messages as well. From a relatability perspective, it's really important to know your target audience or your community and use language that resonates with them. For us, that was football, especially English football to begin with, using messages that resonate with them, analogies and stories that once again they can relate to, and they feel this sense of belonging. I guess from another relatability perspective, it's important to look at how climate change impacts whatever sport or whatever phenomena it is that we love. From from a football perspective here in the UK, if we're speaking to stakeholders in English football, we can talk about how flooding or through sea level rise or excessive rainfall is going to see 25% of stadiums in professional men's football here in England flooded by 2050. That's a very crazy statistic, but straight away that relatability, you can get any football fan's attention with that, and there's great power that comes with it. I think another thing is authenticity, to unpack that a little bit more, to come at it showing the community that you're serving that you're one of them. You're not a sustainability consultancy or a climate scientist who's trying to hijack or use football or whatever sport it might be as a vehicle to achieve your agenda. Showing them authentically that you are a football fan, that I am a football fan, and we're doing this to better the sport. And also, communicating with them clearly that if we approach this intelligently, we can address issues of environmental sustainability whilst addressing issues of fan experience and enhancing that, or financial sustainability for institutions within football, even performance for players. So that's quite interesting.
Right.
So yeah.
Thank you. So what I'm hearing across the board here after our first round is 4 mechanisms of action. So from Jürgen, we heard athletes and coaches and pushing on that lever. From Nicole, pushing on the corporate side, the supply chain side. From Julie, the broader communications platform, and from Elliot, the fan activism platform. For those keeping score at home. Okay, so what we know that sustainability is a lot about greening our own operations, right? We have to get our own house in order, as Nicole is very much helping the corporates do, and others are doing in different ways. But let's talk a little bit about tapping into that SDG 17, the partnerships, the importance of connecting with local change makers, and often the people who are most affected by decisions that are made. So Nicole, I'd like to start with you on this one. What role do the local kind of change leaders play in the sports industry, both advancing its own agenda, but also amplifying and supporting that movement?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that our experience is that any company initiative starts with a champion, right? There has to be a champion that's going to, pardon the pun, but pick up the ball and run it down the field, right? And to actually be kind of like the person that spearheads it internally. And so, like whether you're working within a company, a large company with a significant purchasing spend, or whether you're kind of like a local community member, then like the role of individuals in helping spark movements is and ultimately significant change is really important. So I think the Alison and Elliot and Jürgen have spoken really eloquently, and I'm sure everybody that's part of GSA is really cognizant of the power, like the cultural influence of sport. It's part of why we all love sport. It creates community, it galvanizes it. And so I think, as conveners, be it as sporting equipment companies, as food companies that are, supplying arenas or being team management, we have an incredible ability to actually help engage local communities and individuals who are fans of sport and may not just have, at this point, have the access to the resources to be able to make more sustainable choices. And so I think, finding really creative ways to engage community, developing community challenges and community drives, opportunities for kind of local champions as well as the broader community that are part of an individual sporting team or initiative, for them to be able to engage. And so I think it's both walking the talk with your practices, but also, like in becoming an advocate, becoming really public around what it is that you're doing, using your social channels, engaging kind of like your leading athletes, having a climate jocks campaign. I know that in Australia, there's been a number of leading sports people, footballers and swimmers that have taken part in quite public social media campaigns for climate action. And so I think it's that amplifying, providing a platform that helps celebrate those that are stepping forward. That's quite open about the challenges that there are, and brings that vulnerability to the conversation, because none of us are perfect, but if we're all working alongside of each other to create change, like this is a pre-competitive space, stabilizing our climate, right? And it absolutely requires, none of us can do it by ourselves. No single company can do it by themselves. And so I think the power of collective action is really something that sporting entities are uniquely positioned, both in terms of working within their supply chains alongside of their peers in a pre-competitive spirit to drive change. And we've seen that happen in our work in the fashion industry, with now more than 50% of global viscose production verified with green shirt or at low risk or taking action to address risk. And it can also happen in terms of building a broader movement and enabling communities and everybody who goes home of a night to be able to make more sustainable choices as well.
Terrific. Alison, I want to flip over to you and ask, how is it that your organization is helping engage local? As we know, all action is local at the end of the day. As well as what the recommendations you might have for GSA members to fully leverage that local element.
Yeah. So I think there's some basic principles that I think we probably all share, which I'm going to run really quickly about. First of all, there's some really important words that we've already used. I've already heard this word around belonging, pre-competitive, truth. Always truth really matters. But there's also ideas around community engagement and inclusion, working with equity and diversity, and looking at these issues as transversal issues around climate action, equality in relationships, making sure that there's always conversation and dialogue, always build on what's already there. There is always something there. Don't sort of parachute in. Understand why and how it's relevant by listening, look at local examples and celebrate. Again, that was another important word, and a commitment to learning. And using sports, using events, using these communities that already exist are fantastic mediators, and I don't think we use our convening power always very well. Just a couple of something which really occurred to me just now, which is that Julie's bicycle works very much on the understanding that the context in which we work itself forms a system. The sports industry is itself a system. And one of the key sort of ideas is working systemically. So understanding this collective contribution. We're not going to do this all together in the same way. So working in community, it's really not trying to apply the same set of principles that you would work with in policy or in a particular field. It's really recognizing that we must work together and collaborate together and learn from one another in order to speak up and out to power, which is where the big disjunct is. And never to underestimate that power, that capacity of community to speak up and out, as well as and how we can mediate that. So all sorts of principles there. We work with hundreds and hundreds of organizations, many of whom are now working in very individual and diverse ways to speak with their communities. So the enabling factors, the enabling principles for that work is something that I think we focus on in order to let the arts, let culture, let sports do its own wonderful stuff.
Thanks. I wanted to come now to Jorgen, because this is a highly relevant one for you. Common Goals, obviously a global organization. yet to be effective, you must act locally. So maybe you can share a little bit more about how you bring those local leaders into your work to create that momentum at scale.
Yeah, when I mentioned at the beginning that what we have done like over the past 20, now it will be now, yeah, it's a little bit more than 20 years, is actually to identify those leaders, like very similar to how Ashoka works or kinds of social entrepreneur networks work. Just with, in our case, with a focus on organizations that would have come across football as a helpful tool for them to accelerate change, whatever that change would be in their communities that would be relevant to them. So that was like the work we have done for a long time. Now the addition to also look at the industry and identify those. Elliot very eloquently mentioned like the values he has built Football for Future on, relatability, authenticity, truthfulness. Um, to identify those within the industry to actually like connect both, like to stimulate more demand locally for to support like access to the organizations that are increasingly more equipped to take on the work with bigger groups and bigger numbers of young people who need this access in order to get on a route towards a sustainable livelihood that would allow them actually to unlock their talent, both in a responsible citizen servant leadership in whatever frame that is, as well as like obviously from an access to opportunity point of view.
Mm-hmm.
So I can relate very much to what has been mentioned before, that I think it was Nicole talking about, like at the end of the day it's all, or you, Alison, all about individuals. We just chose to focus on, if we talk about system change, like we rather think about that being a bottom up kind of situation. We are not a lobby organization. That I think is work of others. But we do think that within the existing systems there are individuals that can help drive that change. It's just not enough of that championing and not enough of that servant leadership we were able to identify in order for us to believe that we could directly affect the systems, like and more of a top down system change. We just don't believe that anymore, like that we, at least we don't have the capacity to do that. Therefore our focus more on equipping local organizations, and local organizations can be professional football clubs. It doesn't need to be like the tiny NGO. It's people who have a community. That's what we're talking about. And obviously are in our playing field is football, and within the playing field this is our sort of idea of how we collectively can achieve something. And I do think also sports, actually I do think alongside music, also carries this metaphor. And I think that's the second big message, I think, is this idea of collaboration. And I want to say two or three things on this collaboration. I think it's very understated, like the value of collaboration. Like it's just the value of collaboration is not being identified as such, at least not as this, with this critical importance to get anything done. Here we're talking mainly environmental sustainability, but any change at scale will need a sort of radical collaboration for which none of us has been trained. Like we have been trained to do the whole opposite, to shine, to be rock stars, to be different to everybody else, to be better than everybody else, and to talk about that all the time. So like this, actually radically collaborating, I think it's a very tough ask for at least like in our experience. So we very much believe like there are people who understand that and who are willing to act in their positions of decision making, power, etc., to act in that direction. So that's what we identify on the one side, like within the industry. And then there is a whole new generation that can be equipped with all these skills and can then drive like into being at families, small businesses, corporations, institutions, political sphere or whatever, wherever they find themselves, but equipped with this new like DNA of humankind to be able to collaborate actually for a goal or for an objective that goes beyond our individual reach. And I think we have all been talking about that. And I think, as in, I mentioned it in a side sentence, like as in music, it is in sport, like at least in team sport, it's so easy to understand that you can't be a goalkeeper and a goal scorer at the same time. You have to be a goalkeeper if you're a goalkeeper and the best possible goalkeeper you can be, but you need the other 10. And the same happens in an orchestra. Like it's the same thing. You can't play all at the same time the same thing. To understand that, I think both music and sport, and obviously with the reach football has, it has a very specific responsibility in that. It is what Ellen said at the beginning. It's relatable. Like people understand that. Now transport that message and talk about like important stuff people can then act upon instead of talking about injuries or salaries or all these kind of things. Like talk about the real stuff. And if that was something that could be backed up authentically, and that's what Elliot is working on, that would, I think, be at least would mean hope to me.
Terrific. Thank you. Thank you. And Elliot, I know this one is very much in your wheelhouse as it's come from the supporter perspective, hyper local and then local at scale. But perhaps you can add in how you're working with other local change makers that maybe that the supporters then join with to bring the agenda forward.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think firstly, the question is like, the role or the potential for community members to play a role in the sport industry. Sustainability solutions is massive. Sports clubs are only one small part of what happens on the pitch, and massively belong to and are embedded in communities. And that's where you can activate change makers. If you want to create change, you can't create it all by yourself. The way that you can maximize and amplify the impact that you have is by supporting and activating and empowering other people to become change makers themselves. I'm going to quickly break down community into two parts here. I guess we've got the community, which is like, the corporate community of sports organizations. And one way that we work with clubs or leagues and associations in the past, any sort of business stakeholder in the sports industry, so we run like training events, and we advise them to invite everybody in their community. Bring all your corporate partners, bring your board of directors, bring the groundskeeper, bring everybody who's part of that community. Let's create a space, invite them into the conversation, approach it with a little bit of playfulness as well. But let's acknowledge the issue at hand, which is the climate crisis. Let's see what knowledge we already have in the room, because there's a lot of knowledge in the room. We're there to facilitate and to get that out, provide like a think tank space. And then, you've got this sort of acknowledgement within the organization, within the corporate community of the organization, that this is an issue, and we all understand that we're a part of the solution. We've all got unique positions of power and responsibilities to be able to tackle this. And then that's how you start to build a lot of willingness internally. The other type of community that we can talk about is obviously fans and young people, school children in communities and local vicinities to sporting organizations. And I think a way that we work with them and work with clubs and different providers to go and engage with them is developing educational workshops. Once again, this relatability is so important, whether it's geographical relatability, tying it into the local stories of maybe the climate that they experience, or national parks that are very dear to those people, or the story of the identity of the club, or the sport that we're talking about as well. It works every time. So it's super powerful. And I think also just taking it beyond the classroom is great as well. If there are no idea is a silly idea. Allow the greatest ambition and creativity as possible when you're working with young people. Let's shoot for the stars and see where we land. And yeah, I think the power of sports brands and the badges are so powerful. I've seen amazing football clubs deliver sustainability workshops to young people, talking about recycling and organizing and separating your waste. And it just massively underutilizes storytelling potential, and the emotion that, you know, sport is so powerful for.
Yeah, fantastic. You know, you've really touched on and underscored the shared identity that sports brings us, and other forms of culture as well. But I think that shared identity, it allows it's going to both unify, you know, across income levels, across age groups and whatnot, bringing that locality in it. Sometimes we aren't all together, even though we cheer for the same team. But at the same time, I think it also allows for disagreement, right? We might both be fans of the same team, but have a very different opinion about one player or another, whether the coach is making the right call or the wrong call. It sort of gives us that safer shared space to go, you know what, I can I can listen to you because I share that identity, but I can also disagree with you, sometimes even very, uh, adamantly. But it won't break the relationship because we still have that core tying us together. And I think that's something we just need to leverage as much as we can. I want to encourage folks to pop their questions in, because I'm going to throw one more item over to our panelists today, so you can have a little bit of time to pop those in. And for the panelists, because you've covered things so richly, I want to jump kind of to that last point that we asked you about, which is and to remind you, the GSA membership, which I'm sure you all know, consists of many of our major leagues, our venues, our teams, but also our corporate members who are help facilitating that journey. And of course, in North America, we also have an extremely extensive collegiate sporting system, which has its own universe of fandom, not only sports but also just fans of the institution, and affinity there. So keeping that in mind in terms of our membership, what are one or two key pieces of advice that you might provide for them to impact socially and environmentally their communities? So this time, I think let's see, where haven't we gone first? Let's go with Alison first this time.
I thought you were going to ask me. So because I'm first, I'll come up with I'll approach this with from an unlikely end, which is that one of the problems that we have with climate at the moment is that it's not a politically palatable, and it's difficult. It's not a politically palatable issue. There's a perception that voters don't care about it, that there's not going to be it's going to make politics unpopular, and I think we really have to challenge that. So I think there's all the stuff that we need to do, which is to come together. I loved your points, Jürgen, about collaboration. I couldn't agree more. I think those points, that both Elliot and Jürgen were making about rooting this in community, never be uncreative about it, embrace diversity, embrace difference in a different way. But I also think we've got to get really hard-nosed about the challenge that we're facing. And that something that's happening that's really interesting, and I'm very involved in at the moment, is talking directly to policymakers in the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, who have never put culture, sports, people at the heart of climate policy. And I think that had they done so in 1992, we would not be here where we are now. We're relying on politicians to mediate climate policy on our behalf, and actually it's a citizens issue. So I think we need to get really hard-nosed about this. The Green Sports Alliance is full of very, very powerful players. So it's not just about speaking, and I say that word just in inverted commas. It is not only about speaking to the communities that aggregate around our incredible capacity to convene, to tell stories, to understand the human experience. It is also about getting really hard-nosed about the politics of it and calling for change. So Julie's Bicycle is very involved in a campaign at the moment calling for culture in its big context to be at the heart of climate policy. We're not talking to communications within the UNFCCC, we're talking to the climate policy makers, and calling for that to be included in the minutiae of climate policy. And we're doing that as a voluntary group of organizations that recognize this incredible uncoupling of community with climate action at the policy level, and the extraordinary capacity that climate policy has to trigger really big shifts in investment, in engagement, in language, in expressing what matters, in business priorities, all of these things. So I think there's an awful lot that we can do about coming together, collaborating, sharing knowledge, all of that work. And I think the time has come to recognize that we're at the 11th hour. We have got a critical role to play in shifting climate policy forward, in taking a very prominent place in recognizing that the work that we do has got to be at the heart of climate solutions and climate frameworks, and actually taking that step in to power brokers who are acting on our behalf all the time, and we need to be at the heart of it.
Fantastic. Nicole, I'd love to hear from you next. What is your call to action for either our members or the Green Sports Alliance itself?
Sure. Thanks, Eileen. And I guess in a kind of, if we were a student of improv, I would do a yes and to what what Alison just said. First, I think I've got three quick things. One is, first of all, often when it comes to sustainability, it's almost the opposite of the Olympics, right? In the Olympics, everybody wants to be first across the line. And when it comes to sustainability, oftentimes, like companies are happy to be like a second or a third or maybe even a sixth, but not too far off the pace, but not necessarily wanting or eager to break the tape. And I think the first piece of advice is that you have to go for gold, right? Like you have to be both ambitious and bold with the kind of like where you set the bar, and you have to get in the game. And it doesn't really matter if you're a sporting goods brand, if you're a food company, if you're a stadium manager, a professional or a college team, can make a really significant contribution to stabilizing our climate and biodiversity. My peers will speak about some of the kind of like cultural aspects, but I'd say you can do that by, one, addressing your sourcing impacts, right? Like for most companies, more than 80% of their climate footprint is attributed to the sourcing of the materials that they use as part of their day-to-day business. And so stepping up to be trendsetters when it comes to sustainability, protecting forests, ensuring that the packaging that your shoes are shipped in, the material that the clothing is made from, the plates and cups that are at your facilities, making sure that they're not coming from high carbon value forest ecosystems, developing a cutting edge policy, making sure, don't just look for sustainably managed wood, which is generally code for business as usual logging. Work with Canopy or another NGO that's kind of really cutting edge in the space and can really help advise you on what best practice is on eliminating your risk, but also being able to contribute to sort of the development and to shift you onto these next gen alternatives that are fundamentally going to be beneficial for you as a business, for the climate, for the communities that we all work and live in, as well as to the 21st century supply chains upon which businesses are going to be dependent. And then the second thing I would say is step forward and become a conservation and a climate champion. So, join Canopy, join another organization, advocate for large-scale conservation, advocate for the kind of climate actions and policies that are needed, contribute to conservation legacies that are larger than any of us individually can create, but by working together clearly towards goals with collective action, we can do so. And I think it's just really to underscore that at this juncture, our planet needs an all-star team. And so it calls on all of us to be courageous in that.
Thank you so much. Elliot, I want to come to you. Please tell us, what is our call to action?
I'll sprinkle a couple down on the table. I think the first one, or like pieces of advice, when conceptualizing climate action or sustainability, it can feel a bit messy. I feel like a good way to do it is with two pillars. I think about social change, awareness, and attitude. Attitudes are key parts of that. Attitudes is often overlooked there. And then you've got social change, and then you've got operations. And within operations, you've got your carbon, you've got your waste, you've got maybe your impact on biodiversity. So I find that very helpful to structure my thoughts. And we do this, we approach it in this way at Football for Future as well. Touching on a couple of points, I think it was Alison's talking about, policy making, and then before that, we're talking about community. A lot of the time, people say, is it top down, is it bottom up? It's both ways. People can get into a little bit of analysis paralysis, being like, which way should it be? Of course, it's all of our responsibilities. Another thing I'd say is let's try to redefine the climate conversation. I feel like traditionally it's a little bit, it's not particularly attractive. It can be associated with, different types of activism or your geography teacher or whatever it might be. Let's try to approach it with like some, a fresh dynamic, and redefine what it means to be somebody who cares about the planet. I think that's like one of the greatest ways that we can build participation, by making it attractive and growing the movement as fast as we all know it needs to be to reach the climate goals that have been set by, the IPCC. And then as like, what would I recommend an organization doing in terms of like first steps? The other ones are like conceptual pieces of advice, but like concrete steps. Try and get an audit done of where you're at, because you can't manage what you don't measure. How can you get to B or like Z, or whatever your net zero target is, if you don't know where you're starting at A? So I think try and, with the resources and capacity that you've got, try and get some type of environmental audit done. And the other thing I would recommend is get a training session for your staff, because you might be a champion. Every organization needs a champion to start that journey, but you can't change a whole organization by yourself. You need a team. Activate other change makers with you, provide a space to have, critical conversations, and invite people into that. And I think by doing those two, if you have the capacity to do those things, then you'll be well on your way to doing some amazing things.
Terrific. Jürgen, I don't want to take you off your game of what you might have been thinking about adding, but it was not lost on me that Common Goal recently ran a very impressive mental health campaign across North America with your North American arm. So I did want to call that out, that we're talking about all things here, sustainable, economic, social, and environmental. But please do give us your thoughts on a call to action for us all.
Yeah, maybe I mean, a lot has been said, and I want to keep it short. I would ask everybody to just be honest to yourself. Answer yourself the question if you want to be part of the problem or part of the solution. And if you decide to be part of the solution, ask yourself a second question, which is, am I actually doing what I can do in the position in which I am? And if you don't know how to answer that question, then it's us. Like, just come, talk to us. We are not, we are only doing that. We're here to help, but I do think that we need another level of honesty to ourselves, be happy about what we do, with the perspective that it will be our legacy, and either we leave bigger problems behind, or we leave us with being part, or us as being part of the solution behind. And I think this decision everybody needs to take by themselves, but we need everyone to take that decision, and ideally you get on the solution side.
Yeah, indeed. So I want to bring Katie back in if we can, so that she can share some of the questions. We don't have too many today. I think it's because you've all given a lot of people room for thought. But Katie, if you would.
Yeah, thank you so much to our panelists. As a nonprofit ourselves, I love hearing about all the great work that our allies are doing, around the world. We have a lot of different accents on here today, which is very exciting. Um, I know we only have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to do this quickly. If anyone, the Green Sports Alliance is a resource. We put out playbooks each year. This year, we're putting out a playbook on reuse. If you're in the reuse industry, please contact me or Michael, who's on my team. I'll put his email in the chat. And then we're also doing one on energy. So if you're in the energy industry and you're looking to contribute, same thing, you can email me or Michael. Just a few upcoming events. You all probably know Lauren Lichterman on our team. She's our collegiate specialist. She's hosting a webinar on February 27th. You can go to greensportsalliance.org/events to register for that event. And last but not least, I know you've all been waiting patiently for location and dates of our summit this year. We will be putting it out in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much for your patience. We have also been patient on our end, so very excited to share that with you guys. And I'll give the last few minutes for a few questions. We have some in the chat. Eileen, if you can see them, or I can take over as well.
Yeah, I actually can't. They're a bit cut off on my screen, which is why I was hoping that you might be able to share them. I can't
Yeah,
see the full question.
yeah. One of them is, the FIFA World Cup is coming to the US in 2026, as everyone probably knows. Are any of you guys involved in that, or are hoping to get involved?
Yeah,
To the panel.
we're working around it. There is not much clarity on how all topics beyond just a mere event realization will be approached from the organizer side. So the guidelines are not out yet there. So the host cities are in standby. So it's not yet very clear. But we are definitely putting ourselves at the disposal of whatever can be done. And there is a network out there from our side that is 30 plus organizations across the region. In every major city, there is a representation of Football for Good with a solid organization behind it. And then across, you mentioned the mental health topic. There is 5 topics that we have focused on, which is mental health, diversity, climate action, racial justice, and social inclusion. So there's these 5 we have identified to be where football can do the most. Here we are, but we don't know yet exactly how.
Yeah, and for all of our attendees, I put all of our panelists' emails into the chat. So if there's a stadium who's involved in the FIFA World Cup on this, feel free to reach out to any of them to get some inclusion in any of these topics that Jurgen just talked about. And then the last question is, how frequently do your organizations engage and collaborate with government programs, if any? Go ahead, Allison.
We do a lot. So we're working both with national governments, but also, as I said, with the UNFCCC to really understand how to translate the work that we've been doing around net zero, around and wider work to actually start to bake into government policy and funding what an appropriate climate action looks like. And this is really important because we have what's called nationally determined contributions. We have commitments from our government to meet certain targets which are going to keep this world safe. And actually, they don't really apply across beyond really, really big sectors such as the buildings sector or the transport sector. And this is a huge missed opportunity to both us to be much more self-determining about what we do and how we're reflected in policy, but also about how we can reach out to that, bringing the human and the experiential and the sort of wider than material responses to climate action, so that it's embedded in communities and in the things that we love. So yes, we do a lot of it, and I think it's really important work.
Great. We're at time, but because we have a little bit more to be added here, if people want to stay on for a moment, I think both Elliot and Jürgen had a little bit to add there, and
Elliot,
Nicole.
do you want to go first, or mine is just to say that there's before the World Cup in the US, there's a Euro this year in Europe, which from the scale of the event is comparable. And it will happen in Germany, and we are organizing in collaboration with 4 ministries in Germany, a football sustainability summit, and it's all about stimulating actions that would be unlikely to happen if we weren't creating such an environment. So whoever feels attracted by that idea, please reach out. I even also the panelists, obviously, if that's an environment where you would want to act within, just let me know, and we have a conversation.
Great.
How about Elliot?
I'm going to be cheeky and hop back to that question about the 2026 World Cup. So it's been really interesting to see how the football industry in North America or in the host countries has been responding to that from a sustainability perspective. We've had a few of the host cities or host stadiums getting in touch asking for sustainability support, but it's been quite varied in terms of requests and expectations. And I think this is because of the guidance isn't super clear. I know that there's no mandatory sort of sustainability criteria in the bidding process or anything at the moment, which is something that might change. But yeah, very interesting to sort of reflect on and to see how it's going to manifest across the different cities across Canada, the US, and Mexico. Open to any conversations for or with people who are involved in those processes or those places. And one final thing that two final points I'd like to make on that. One, such a great opportunity to make a big splash around sustainability and climate awareness and all of those in the footballing communities of all of those countries and beyond, of course, given the world stage that the World Cup has. The other thing is that there's a lot of controversy around the Qatar World Cup's sustainability credentials with all of the offsetting. But one thing that Qatar did do, which people don't speak about so often, is by integrating sustainability as such a core pillar of its identity, it set a precedent for future tournaments, which was never the case. Sustainability was never a core part of a conversation around tournaments, major tournaments and major events. And now it is. It is for the Euros this summer. UEFA said that it's going to be the most sustainable European Championships of all time. And now we're seeing, these conversations happening around the 2026 World Cup. And it's always going to be like that. It's never going to disappear.
Nicole? Thank you, Elliot.
Sorry, I know that we're over time. So I would just say that Canopy doesn't work with government as a focused part of our work, but our work with brands and with companies and does ultimately lead us into conversations with government. And we do find that, be it with the American Apparel and Footwear Association, that those kinds of conduits that individual companies both, themselves unilaterally through their GR entities as well as through these associations in collaboration with NGOs can have a really important impact on helping to positively advance kind of enabling kind of policy framework that's needed.
Yeah. Okay, we are very much over time, but to wrap in two points, speaking from the Green Sports Alliance chair, literally green chair that I sit in. One, I'm very fascinated to explore how we might help our members look more detailed down their supply chain. because that's an area we have identified. They're doing actually quite an outstanding job in their venues. And two, to that point, it's possible you may not be hearing as much from the host cities and the host venues because almost 100% of them are GSA members, and they have been actually measuring, monitoring, reducing for quite some time, and are quite eager to show off what they've been doing, but also take the occasion of the World Cup to catalyze their wish list projects that they've been pushing on, which I greatly hope will include a lot more fan engagement in the fan zones, opportunities there, advocacy opportunities, and of course, maybe this is our moment to address the supply chain. We have seen environmental and social responsibility coming through in the FIFA tenders actually so far. So so far so good. Let's look for a good 2026 and 2025 with the Club Cup. I would love to thank you all so much for taking the time from many, many different time zones around the world to join us and share a little tiny slice of the vast Ashoka Sport for Changemaking network and the vaster Ashoka network of social entrepreneurs. I know that we are going to benefit phenomenally from our new partnership with Ashoka in bringing many of these solutions and ideas together. And as so many of you pointed out, collaboration is key. Redefining that climate conversation. And Nicole, I'm going to end on your note. We do need that all-star team. And so I think we're well on our way to broadening the pool to pull that together. So on behalf of the Green Sports Alliance, again, our many thanks to those who have joined us in the conversation, and we hope it's inspired you and you'll find some collaborators amongst those here.
Thanks, Eileen. Thanks, GSA.
Thank you very much.
Thanks
and
very
see you
much.
soon somewhere.
Bye.